For the debate, I recognize the member from Ottawa Centre.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Happy to rise and speak to bill before the House, which is about road safety, something near and dear to my heart. As some members of this House know, around this time last year, I rode my bicycle from Ottawa to Toronto. And my goal in doing that, as the critic for active transportation and transit, was to talk to people in all kinds of different communities, downtown ones like where I serve in Ottawa Centre, but smaller communities like Brighton, Ontario, like Kingston, a city in itself, Oshawa, suburban community, and Toronto, Scarborough. I wanted to talk to residents about how safe they felt in our streets getting around. And what I heard disturbed me, Speaker. And while I will say before this House that I'm glad the government continues to talk about the need for having a serious policy with respect to road safety, I am very concerned that to this day and in this debate this afternoon, I continue to hear government members say that Ontario roads are among the safest in North America. I've just heard the minister say they are. I would say that depends on where you measure it, Speaker.
Where you live.
If you like where you live, as the member from Muskegowak, James Bay, just said. If your goal is to be fine with the fact that every day there will be 134, a rate of 134 people critically injured or killed on our streets, if you're fine with that, then yes. Ontario has some of the best streets in the world. It's true. The Ministry of Transportation releases road collision statistics. Look it up yourself. I see my new friend from Bay of Quinte looking at me quizzically. There were, in the last reportable year, 49,106 collision incidents caused by drivers that caused fatal or serious personal injuries in Ontario. That is a rate of 134 per day. And when I stopped in Kingston, and I talked to city councillors, I talked to police officers, I talked to different kinds of road users. One of the people that came to the town hall in Kingston, who's an emergency room physician, when I presented him with those statistics, also looked at me quizzically. And he said, Joel, I can tell you at least on any given shift, I am seeing all kinds of people come to the emergency room. Your numbers are too conservative. So that's my question I would like to begin, Speaker, this afternoon on this road safety debate. Why is the government happy that every day 134 people in this province are critically injured or killed on our streets? Why are they happy with that? Because I'll quote the minister's words back to himself. Everyone deserves to return home to their loved ones safely at the end of the day. Following up quote about impaired driving. Too many families in Ontario have had their lives torn apart by the careless and shameful actions of impaired drivers. Well, in 2016, Speaker, the Ontario Provincial Police said that distracted driving was responsible for 3 times the amount of death as impaired driving. People driving while using their phones, people not taking due caution, getting around all kinds of different communities. And I can tell you who is getting mowed down in the course of those people operating their vehicles: vulnerable road users, road workers, paramedics, police, people responding to incidents, pedestrians, cyclists, scooter users, persons with disabilities. Those are the people that are paying the price for the government being fine with our lackadaisical attitude to road safety. And I honestly, Speaker, I don't understand it given what they say, unless you peel the onion back a little bit and you think about rhetoric versus reality, Speaker. My view as a politician is I don't judge people by what they say. I judge people by what they do. And a previous mayor of this city here in Toronto, the legislature's in Toronto, Rob Ford, once said the following, that I think is the actual philosophy motivating this government. This is what he said, 2010, quote, I compare bike lanes to swimming with sharks. Sooner or later, you're going to get bitten. And every year we have dozens of people that get hit by cars or trucks. Well, no wonder. Roads are built for buses, cars, and trucks, not for people on bikes. My heart bleeds for them when I hear someone gets killed, but it's their own fault at the end of the day. That's the indifference behind the policy, Speaker. That's the indifference behind the policy. And when I talk about a rate of 134 people critically injured or killed every day in this province on our streets, those are just numbers. So in the time I have left, Speaker, I want to talk about the human beings, because they're not just numbers. These are people. These are our moms, our dads, our brothers, our sisters, our neighbours. I want to talk about Audrey Cameron, a 16-year-old high school student on the west end of our riding in Ottawa Centre, who was hit by a reckless driver, thrown into the air as she crossed the street going to Nepean High School, and the driver was running a light. Threw Audrey into the air, witnesses said about 12 or 13 feet. When Audrey landed, cracked her helmet in half. Her pelvis was shattered, her left knee was shattered. She has traumatic brain injuries that she's going to be dealing with for the rest of her life. When EMS brought her to the hospital, she had to be put into a coma so they could find a way to treat her out of her injuries. This is a badly planned stretch of road in our community on Carling Avenue, Speaker. Municipal councillors like Jeff Leeper, Riley Brockington, I'm proud to serve with, have been raising this issue with municipal officials for years. The response is always the same. Protected infrastructure costs money. Protected infrastructure is difficult. Well, I guess the question I would ask, Speaker, through Audrey's experience is, what actually at the end of the day is difficult? Is it difficult to make the investment of a few $1,000s to make sure we can plan for human error, to plan for people who recklessly drive whatever vehicle in our city? Or what about the cost of Audrey being wheeled in the EMS to the Emerge? What about the cost of her being in a hospital bed? What about the cost to her family who missed work as they stayed at her bedside for a week while she was put into a coma? What costs more, Speaker? I would say the same thing about Abu Bakr Syed. I met the Syed family when I was doing my bike ride, Speaker. You remember you were there for the press conference, and we met the Syed family from Scarborough. Mr. Syed was killed during his normal morning walk in Scarborough by a driver who had repeated incidents of reckless driving, had a history of it, tried to flee the scene. They will never get their grandfather back, but their plea to me and to the government was that they make sure that distracted drivers, impaired drivers, pay a consequence. So now before the House, we finally have a bill that talks about the indefinite suspension of someone's driver's license for impaired driving. But what about distracted driving? What about someone who has a pattern of recklessly driving a vehicle? There's no indefinite suspension for that. In fact, the law in Ontario under the Highway Traffic Act is a fine of a few $100s, and you hope you have a successful day in court. That's the law right now. That's the law. I want to go to, member for Sudbury is sitting in front of me, I want to go to the story of Mr. Robert Delosio, who in 2017 was biking on Paris Street in Sudbury, hit by an impaired driver. He had practiced dentistry in Sudbury, Speaker, for 60 years. Incredibly physical, incredibly healthy man, beloved by the city of Sudbury, killed in an instant. You know what there wasn't in that big 4-lane street in Sudbury? Protected bike infrastructure, Speaker. Nothing to protect Mr. Delosio. But if we fast forward to another incident that happened in this city, 6 cyclists, Speaker, that I'm aware of, in this year in Toronto have been killed by reckless or impaired drivers. Julia Cleveland, a big figure in the Toronto jazz music scene, as I understand it, lives over in the Junction, I believe in your community. In the Junction, 2 cars collide, one car going extremely fast. The car that initiates the collision spins out of control, goes up onto the sidewalk last month and kills Julia. 2 other pedestrians critically injured. But you know what might have prevented that accident, Speaker? The mayor of Montreal was speaking about it recently, Valérie Plante, who doesn't make a habit of doing dumb culture wars on bike lanes. She looks at the evidence and says, how do you plan a community to make sure everybody can be safe? If there was a concrete barrier between that stretch of street and the sidewalk, it could have saved Julia's life. But no. We are about to go through a ridiculous debate without any evidence from the government side, I will add. The minister is sitting over there. He has yet to produce any evidence to show that bike lanes cause traffic congestion. But this spot could have been designed differently, and it could have saved lives. Because people make mistakes, reckless behavior is common to human beings, you design communities to prevent against that. I want to talk about J.P. Grindell. J.P. was a young man in Ottawa Centre who was going to school at Adel High School. Great place, intersection of Rochester and Gladstone. But if you look at how that intersection had been designed, Speaker, the bike lane, which is not protected, there are chevrons written on the ground, kind of goes up to the intersection, but there's always a lot of construction activity there, Speaker, because of the highway, and we're building homes, all the stuff we need in our community. But a smart design of that infrastructure would have set the bike lane back, or would have set the truck back so they could see on the right that there was a vulnerable road user, a cyclist, a scooter user, or something. But in this case, when JP went to turn right and the truck turned right in front of him, the dump truck driver couldn't actually see JP, and he was pulling a payload behind him. The truck and the payload ran over him and dragged him, killed him instantly. I have on my website, Speaker, and I invite members of this House to go check it out. I write an update for the community. I write a column for the community every week. This one was called, if you Google the words, "Let's Organize Now for Safe Streets." If you go to that, if you put that into your search engine, you will see pictures of me visiting with Nicole and Bill Grindell 20 years after JP was killed at this intersection. You will see the picture of the dump truck driver who was responsible for this, but who couldn't see JP. With his head in his hands, his life forever changed. I talked to one of JP's friends who was there, who was a nurse. The trauma from this incident, losing her friend, pinwheeled her into a life of mental health illness and addictions from which she's recovered. Think about all the tragedy that happens because we couldn't plan the intersection of Rochester and Gladstone well enough. 3 people. When I was in Brighton on my bike ride, Speaker, the same thing happened to me. I taken a stop, getting some Gatorade, big dump truck there. I said, "Hey, I'm on this bike ride about road safety. Can I get up into your cab? Would you mind if I got into your cab if you just got a sense of the sight lines?" And he said, "Sure, come on up." There's no way I could see things into the corner of the truck when I was checking mirrors in the driver's seat. Don't worry, folks, I didn't try to drive the vehicle. I'm not licensed for that. The gentleman said to me, "Joel, when I'm on a construction site, there are flag people that guide me around the site. That's the law. But when I move off the site and I'm out there in the community, you're darn right, I'm worried about where the cyclists are, where the people are. I need to be extra careful, but you can't see everything." So every time we don't take road safety seriously, Speaker, which this government continues to do, people lose their lives. People get critically injured. And it's not right. It's unnecessary. So this is what I would say. There's good things in this bill. We heard from the member for Toronto Centre earlier this afternoon. We'll hear from other members. We are all opposed to auto theft. We all want to make sure that there are rigid rules in place to deal with stunt driving. No one in this House will oppose this. What I am officially fed up with in this House are people who talk about safety and encourage chaos with the words they use from their platforms. When I send vulnerable road users to meet with you, and you meet with them and you shake their hands, and you say, "Thank you, I really understand where you're coming from," and then you proceed to wage a war against bike lanes, I don't take you seriously anymore. I don't take you seriously anymore. Because the evidence is very clear, Speaker. Just as the minister once upon a time said, everybody wants to get home safely. Everybody wants to not be trapped in traffic and gridlock. Well, maybe get on some of your transit projects, which are billions of dollars over budget, so you can get people out of cars. Maybe deal with the fact, looking at the latest figures here, that about 85% of 401 users in a given year are single-passenger occupants. Maybe they would be much better served being on a train or a bus if it came regularly, if it was affordable for them, if they could get to work and do what they needed to do. Why don't you do something about your transit mess? Take some cars off the road that way. And why don't you stop pitting road users against each other? I'm a driver. I'm a cyclist. I'm a pedestrian. Because of some of the sports I've played in my life, maybe I'll be in a wheelchair towards the end of my life. I want to have a safe way to get around. And that's not going to happen, Speaker, if, as Mr. Delosio found on Paris Street, you're basically dealing with a freeway inside a city and people driving, the minority of people the reckless road users, people driving unsafe. So the government talks about a zero-tolerance policy. What I would love, Speaker, for this debate and before this bill comes back for third reading when it goes to committee, I would like a zero-tolerance policy on empty rhetoric. I would like a zero-tolerance policy on silly culture wars. I would like a zero-tolerance policy on talking about the bicyclists being the problem, or the motorists being the problem, or the wheelchair. No, we all live in our communities, and we all have to figure out a way to get home safe.
Zero-tolerance on corruption.
A zero-tolerance policy on corruption would be nice, too. So I also want to talk about Eli Sezgin Armagon. Eli Sezgin Armagon was a food delivery worker killed on Avenue Road in August 2024. According to statistics that I was able to get through Mayor Chow's office, this is a terribly dangerous part of Toronto. Toronto, relative to other communities, has got a lot of bike infrastructure. But food delivery workers have been getting mowed down in this stretch of road. Mr. Armagon is the third in 4 years.
Wow.
So when we all get home later tonight, we want to kick back with a pizza, watch the game, relax a little bit from our overheated debate in this House, and you pick up the phone and you order your food, it's someone like Mr. Armagon who's responsible for bringing that to you. But we lost him, Speaker. We lost him because of a truck that couldn't see where they were going, and a bike lane that was being used up, and a man that was being pushed into traffic. His cousin, who brought him to Canada, Mr. Armagon was from Turkey, said she remains, she told me recently, inconsolable. Has a hard time sleeping. Thought that this was going to be his opportunity to make his life in Canada. That's the story of our country, right? People come here to make a better life for themselves and their family. But here's a guy who will never get that opportunity. And it wasn't his fault. And I don't blame the truck driver either, actually. I blame our lack of seriousness as legislators to build safe communities. That's who I blame. It's actually, we don't point fingers in this business. We should be pointing thumbs. We should be looking at ourselves. We should be saying, how do we make sure that we don't set the goal of 134 people being critically injured or killed a day as acceptable, the best in North America? We set the goal that the governments of Finland and Denmark have set, which is called Vision Zero. It's the philosophy that the City of Toronto has subscribed to, my city, the City of Ottawa, has subscribed to. The goal is not 134 people critically injured or killed every day. It's zero. Zero. And guess what? In Finland and in Denmark, they have accomplished it. Are there still collisions? Yes. Are there fatalities? No. No. In some of their major cities, Helsinki, Copenhagen, no. And if you look at pictures of the usage rates of vulnerable road users, cyclists in particular, it is dense. There's a lot of vehicles using these roads. France, city of Paris, last year surpassed the milestone of having more active transportation users than car users in the city of Paris. Last year was one of the mayor's obligations in getting ready for the Olympics, was to transform the city into a place where people could get around so they could see their various events, do their various things. Mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, set the same objective. We have to figure out a way for people to get around the city. Now, the skeptics will say, but wait a sec, Joel, you're an inveterate cyclist. Maybe you're crazy enough to cycle in the winter, but most people won't because it's unsafe. Well, in Montreal, the bike lanes get cleared first. And the roads get cleared. Everybody has an option to get to where they need to go. And people are healthier. There's less congestion. I mean, Montreal's got congestion, don't get me wrong. But the government can't keep talking about safety and then encouraging conflict in their rhetoric. They can't keep talking about reducing traffic while adding to it by failing on the transit front and declaring war on bike lanes. I was interested to see in Deputy Mayor Amber Morley's town hall in Etobicoke the other night that the fire chief of the area declared before the room that their access to critical incidents has not gotten worse with bike lanes, it's gotten better, because the bike lanes are built to a width, where the emergency vehicles can utilize them if need be. It's an expressway for them. to get to somebody when they're in distress, those critical seconds to save somebody's life. So again, what I will say to the government speaker, a lot of what you're trying to accomplish with this bill is admirable, but stop playing games with people's lives. Thank you.
Thank you.